Thursday morning, everybody. I hope you guys are all doing well out there. I'm excited to have a great show with you today. We've got a special guest with us today, Mr. Scott Chris from Chris Law. Welcome, Scott. Hopefully we got.
Good morning.
There we go. There we go.
Sorry about that.
We
Thanks
in
for
the
having me.
past we in the past have chatted on the show a little bit about 1031s, and we talked about trying to bring on somebody that could do a little bit of a deeper dive, and that's what Scott is here to do for us today. So I'm excited about that. Before we turn it over to Scott, anybody have anything that's just pressing on their mind, something in one of your real estate deals that we need to talk about? Martin, what do you got?
So, my buyer ran, I guess, all the permits that were used for the house, and on some of it says final, and then some of it says issued. And before we close, he wants to make sure all the permits have been closed out. And something I just learned this morning, so I don't know if anybody has had anything to do with it. It's in Springfield. Do I just call or go down building inspector, say, hey, listen, these been issued. Can we get them to be in final in the system, or what to do basically?
So, Lauren, I see your hand up. I don't know if you wanted to tackle this or you had something separate.
I had something separate, but I feel like this is a topic that's come up a bunch recently, right? Is this what we just added to our task list? I
Yeah,
think you might do.
yeah, I can handle it, and and then I'll get to your question next. So, yeah, Martin, we're pretty much adding this now to our transaction coordinator task list. We've always notified the client that they should be reaching out and doing this. So I don't know if your client did it on their own or you prompted them to. So that's my first question, just out of curiosity. Did you prompt this, or did the client just do it on their own?
I didn't prompt it. I'm guessing they did it on their own, or possibly if
Due to
if my
the
CT
email.
was supposed to, maybe she did
Yeah.
it. I'm not too sure.
Okay, so we're adding a new step. I just think this one's getting pretty important. We definitely don't want somebody purchasing and then post close figuring out they got open permits. So we really got to be on top of this. So we are adding a step that our TCs will be notifying you to reach out to the client. You know, we know these emails, a lot of them go unread. And so I think this is a step where us as agents need to be reaching out to the client and asking about this. But yeah, I think the next step is as simple as that. Sometimes they literally just didn't come and do a final walkthrough and do the paperwork, right?
Okay.
Where you could have an issue is there's depending on the permit and what's being done, there could be multiple steps, right? So the first one, you get a permit issued. Second one is they say, hey, we want to come out when X, Y, and Z are done. We want to look at it. Let's say you were doing some wiring. I want to see the wiring in the walls prior to you closing up the walls, right? So that's step one. And then, hey, have me back again when the work is done. So when you close up the walls, I'll come a second time, I'll check that off, and now we'll get a final. So the only thing where you could really run into a problem here is if that middle step wasn't done. So, Adam, I see your hand up. I know you got a lot of experience with this stuff. What do you have to add?
Yeah, I can just add a little bit of flavor here. So, hold on one second. So yeah, I mean, if the permit is not closed out, I would say 95% of the time, it's not just going to be as simple as calling them and asking them to close it out in the system. And they're going to have to come out to the house and make sure whatever permit was done was closed. There's not a lot of checks and balances in the city systems to, look for open permits and try to get them closed. It could just sit there open for a while. So maybe this is something we can have VA do, but a lot of towns are online. So Martin, if you just type in Springfield, Mass online permit lookup, you'll be able to go in there and look and see what's been pulled and if it's open or closed. I know Chicopee's online. I'm trying to think of some others, but anyway, so that's what I would do just to get your own knowledge. And the second thing I wanted to just share with everyone is kind of the typical permit process. So there's three major types of permits. There's an electrical only permit, there is a plumbing only permit, and there is a building permit. So a plumbing only permit would come in, like let's say you are swapping out a kitchen sink, maybe you got new granite countertops, maybe you're swapping out a vanity and toilet. Like in West Side, they're going to want you to pull a permit just for those little things. That would be a plumbing only. There's no electrical involved. There's no framing involved, right? That's plumbing only. And similar to electric, maybe you're getting your kitchen outlets from regular 2-prong or a 3-prong to GFI. That would be an electrical only permit. But anytime you're doing renovations, let's say you're taking down a wall in between the kitchen and living room, or let's say you're gutting a bathroom, you're going to need a building permit is the overarching permit. And then underneath that is electrical and plumbing. So the typical stages are, one, they're going to come check the framing. Okay, so framing inspection. Then after it's framed, then you run your wires and your plumbing, right? So they don't want the plumber and electrician doing any of that until they pass the framing, right? So you got framing, then you've got plumbing and electrical, then you've got insulation, then you've got drywall, right? So once they come and say, okay, rough electrical is good, rough plumbing is good, then you can insulate. Then they come and do an insulation inspection, and then you can finish it, right? So that's usually where it gets hung up is after they come and sign off on framing, insulation, electrical, and plumbing, it could sit open for years because at that point you can put up the drywall, you can come and do all your outlets, you can put your fixtures in, you can put your vanity in, all of that stuff. If you don't call the city back to check on that, it's not gonna be closed out. So hopefully that just gives you a little flavor of the different types of permits. You know, something like a roof, for example, is a drive-by inspection. So roofs are very easy to get closed out, but anything interior is typically going to need, someone's eyes on it.
Martin, I saw your hand go back up.
Yeah, so I I did pull the history from online, and it was like low voltage burglar alarm installation and hot water heater residential that was issued. So I'm hoping those would be pretty easy. And there's
Yeah.
like a plumbing residential, but that was pulled the same day, I'm guessing for the same reason. I guess I have another question is some people are big on, I have some buyers that are big on like, was this ever permitted, blah, 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 blah. And then, you have the people that don't care. And just on my own house, I never pulled permits for anything, anything I've ever done, knocking down walls, stuff like that. But would that be an issue, you think, or at the end of the day, or is it, depending on the buyer?
I mean, from my perspective, typically homeowners can get away with, look, my advice has to be always pull a permit, right? But what I've seen in my experience is homeowners get away with a lot more than those of us that are labeled as flippers or remodelers, right? So anytime something looks like a flip, you're going to run into a lot more issues than whether if you're a homeowner and have done things over the last 20 years. I would also encourage you or add that, a lot of times the permit process is not as scary as you might think. And it also holds your contractor responsible to avoid shortcuts. So the actual fee for the permit is usually pretty reasonable. It's depending on the scope of the project. Sometimes it's based on the value of the project. So I mean, I don't know that I've ever paid a permit fee over like a standard one might be 50 or $100, and maybe a high-end edition might be like $300. So they're very reasonable, and you have the documentation. Are they going to make you upgrade a couple things in your circuit breaker box? Maybe, but typically those are things you're going to want, and they've upgraded codes for a reason. So, I've seen people get away with it though.
Chris, I don't know if you're in a position to talk. I wasn't sure what your comment meant. You said lots of permit applications.
I just put in there all the different applications, like just on the Westfield one alone. If you click the button under, I saw it didn't come out. It comes out, you have the electrical permit, the gas fitting permit, the notice of complaint, plumbing permit, residential addition. You know what I mean? It goes on and on and on. Swimming pool, like Adam just said.
There's a lot.
There's
Yeah.
lots of different ones. So
Cool. Well, Lauren, I know I got another question, but I do want to get to Scott and his topic today. We'll see how long that runs, and if we got time at the end, we will get to that question. So, Scott, the floor is yours, man.
Thank you. Can you allow me to share my screen, Steve, if you haven't
Yep.
already?
Yeah. Let's see here. I think you should be able to, and then I just got to
All right.
figure out how I.
Yep.
Yep. Is it going to let you?
Yeah, I think so. Yep, all good. All right. Thank you all for having us this morning. One of our associates, Katie Sheen, is also on the line. I know many of you know Katie, who is in our West Springfield office. So thanks for having us. And hopefully everyone's busy with this spring market. So we'll start off in the bit with the basics on 1031 exchange, which I know most of you know, but I think it's a good starting point. And please just speak up along the way if you have any questions. So what is a 1031 exchange? It is also known as a like-kind exchange. It's a tax-deferred transaction where investors can exchange an investment property for another similar property, deferring capital gains on the sale. This is all governed by Section 1031. That's of the IRS code. That's why it's called 1031 exchange. And it's essentially it allows an individual to avoid paying taxes on the profit from selling one property by reinvesting the proceeds into a replacement property of equal or greater value, something you probably all know. So some more basics. It's tax deferred. It's not tax free. This is something with investors we see all the time. You know, they do a 1031 exchange, and then down the road, they have some capital gains left and they're unhappy. Just remember, it just defers the gain. And as you know, the longer you hold an investment property, the lesser the gain will be. So it just defers that gain, hopefully until it's lessened. Has to be a like-kind property. We also see this. We just had a customer who tried, before they got to us, tried to move a second home to an investment property. And you cannot do that. It has to be like kind. So investment property or investment property. So generally real property, building, land, or other investment property to a second investment property. Reinvestment. The sale proceeds are reinvested into the replacement property, and it essentially rolls over the capital gains to the new investment, which is sort of what we talked about.
Scott, I want to stop.
Yeah,
I want to stop you on that one. This came up the other day. So let's say I sell a property for 400. I owe 200 on it, so I want to roll 200 into the next property. Right? I'm going to do the exchange. I got 200 to put down on the next property, but I actually don't want to put down the 200. I only want to put down 100 of it, and I need 100 to pay off some credit card debt, etc.
Yep.
Can I just pay taxes on that and just roll the 100?
Yep. I'm getting that later. That's called boot. And so anything that's left over is fine. It is just taxable under regular rates.
Okay.
So, you know, and a lot of this, obviously, you know, it intersects with your client's CPA duties. So there's always, you know, ways, depending on the full picture of your tax ramifications, there's a possibility that you can lessen that gain and lessen that hit as well. It's a great question. It comes up often. So just a few key rules. Like-kind property, I just want to stress it again, because this is generally where people get held up. Replacement property must be of similar nature or use to the relinquished property. So again, investment to investment. Identification deadline. We see people get hit by this all the time. The individual trying to achieve the exchange has 45 days from the sale of the relinquished property to identify the replacement property. Now, the key word there is identify. So, you know, there's all sorts of interpretations of that for us. With our clients, we want to make sure that an offer is placed at least. You can just write down, you know, you can draft a quick letter saying, you know, I identified this property, but really to be 100% safe, you do want to try to have an offer on a new property in that 45-day time frame. The closing, so the purchase deadline, you have 180 days from the sale of the relinquished property to actually close, and that means deed recorded. We actually have seen people 181st day they close and they have gotten flagged by the IRS. So be very careful there when either doing a 1031 exchange yourself or directing your clients to do one. No direct sale. So this is also important. The existing property cannot be sold and then the replacement property purchased by the individual. So you can't hold that money in between. The QI or qualified intermediary must be involved. There has to be distance between the seller and those funds during the intermediate period. and a qualified intermediary must be used to hold the funds for the exchange, which we talked about. We work with a few, all the title insurance companies have intermediary companies. We actually work with a bank, Leader Banks intermediary. They're pretty good. And like anything else in our business, it comes down to service, knowledge, and we find that Leader is pretty good with that, but there's a bunch of good ones out there. To Steve's question, the boot question, if there's any cash or other property received in addition to replacement property, that's considered boot and maybe taxable. So we talked about that. So keep that in mind. Just a few benefits, which we'll just, this is sort of doubling up on what we talked about. Deferral of capital gains, delaying capital gains tax on the sale of relinquished property. Continued investment, reinvestment of equity, and continued growth of your portfolio. This can certainly help there, using the funds that aren't taxed to buy something else instead of getting crushed on capital gains cash taxes. And then flexibility. Multiple properties can be exchanged for one, or one large property for multiple solid properties, as long as it's like kind, as long as you're all dealing investment property to investment property. So those are the basics. I'm sure this is a repeat for many of you. But I just wanted to start there, and more than happy to take any questions. I saw one pop up from Martin. Can you purchase the home first, then sell? You can. That's a reverse 1031 exchange. Basically, the same rules apply. You just have to make sure that you're very careful about that 180 days in that situation. Really good question.
Scott, I want to get
Yeah.
clarity on that one. So I buy.
Sure.
I haven't even listed the relinquished property, right? Haven't done
Yep.
anything with it. I go and buy an investment property. I have 180 days and did I have to do something before I bought that investment property? I had to identify, right? Like I'm doing a 1031. I can't just buy it and then decide.
Correct. So that's a key piece, and I'm glad you brought it up. What we suggest is that you contract with the QI, so that intermediary, at the time when you buy the new property, because eventually you're going to exchange it. So the IRS basically, the IRS doesn't really declare anything that helps any of us clearly, but it's become pretty clear to us that when you have identified a QI you're going to work with, that's sufficient to take care of that concern.
Shaston, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to see, are there like restrictions on who qualifies to do a 1031 exchange? Like I've heard where people have said that there's only investors that are allowed to do it. You can't do it if it's like your primary or secondary home. Whether or not they have to be like American citizens. I work with a lot of like Canadian buyers or foreign buyers. So what are the limitations on who's able to do these transactions?
You have to be a U.S. taxpayer, so that's number one. So you have to only people paying taxes as primary residents in the United States can conduct a 1031 exchange. That and investors are the only rule there is that it's investment property. So you can't 1031 exchange your primary. You can't 1031 exchange a second home. But if you have a second home and you start to rent it, and then you have 2 years of rental rental history, that can become an investment property. And so these are all items that your CPA, along with a good attorney, can advise on. But yes, you have to be a U.S. taxpayer, and you also it has to be investment property. I see another question from Martin. Does it have to be an individual? Can it be a trust or LLC? Can be a trust or LLC. Doesn't matter too much how you hold it 1031 wise. Can affect how much the capital gain is deferred depending on how your trust, LLC, corporation pays taxes, and what your and liability is there. Good question. Other questions? Let's see. For perspective, is there a profit level that a 1031 doesn't make sense? I think it all depends on your full tax scheme. I can't think of one. I mean, the more profit you have, the more gain you're going to have. So I don't think higher gain will affect you, negatively. I've never come across a case where it doesn't make sense to defer, any of the liability. Maybe a better question for your CPA when you're looking at the big picture or the customer's big tax picture. Other questions? I'll put my email up too in the chat. So, I'm sure many of you have it, but if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I only charge $500 per email. So
One other thing, Scott, that I was
Yeah.
thinking of, when we were talking about identifying the properties, you do have the ability to identify multiple properties, correct? If you're not
you
sure.
do. You do,
Yeah.
absolutely. As long as, you can really, once you've identified that first property in in that 45-day time period, you sort of have another, with closings now, you have to remember these rules used to be very different when closings took at least 60 days or more often 90 days. So now you're halfway into the period. Now you identify something at 45, you can identify something else at day in this world, 150, and you can still get it closed on time. So that the quickness in the mortgage market has certainly helped.
Any other 1031 questions, guys? Are we good? Scott, did you have anything to maybe add for color on the permits or anything that you've seen there? I
Yeah,
mean,
permits have become a completely unnecessary and a huge roadblock to closings. And we've talked to pretty much every town at this point on permits because it has become such a huge thing. And it started in Boston and it started years ago when attorneys were really trying to justify higher fees. So they're getting involved in permitting. Every single town we talk to says, we are never going back out to look at an unpermitted property. We are never going out to find someone who's unpermitted. Now, I think it was Adam who, said this. When we're talking about homeowners, developers, flippers, absolute different story. But when it comes to just the homeowner, we see these single families being transferred. The realtor goes and pulls permits. There's a non-permanent basement renovation from 1992. There's no liability there, is basically the point. So it does come down to the buyer, how concerned the buyer is, and really what the advice they're getting. It's just become something that has caused a lot of unnecessary delays and issues, in our opinion. We check the permits, we do all that stuff, but the question then comes down to, you're buying a single family house. It's an unpermitted bathroom renovation. What's the liability? What are you really dealing with here? It's not unlike you have some attorneys out there who will hold up a closing over a missing home equity line assignment from 1987. We know it's paid off. So let's use some common sense here. So it really comes down to advising the client. And, we do it on a client by client basis. I'm sure Katie can talk about, you have some people who understand this. We do have people who say, I won't close on this until the permit's closed out. And there's no reason for it, but it is something that for the right client, they just feel, has to be done. But it comes down to me as an attorney, it comes down to the liability issue, and there is none from every one of these towns we talk to. They just don't, not only do they not care, they don't have the manpower to go out and start checking, this unpermitted work. So it's an interesting state of our business right now.
Lauren, we got 5 left. I've seen that hand come up and down. What do you got?
Well, I'll save what I had if we still have attorney on here, because I think related to 1031 and just capital gains in general. I wanted to ask a question. I've seen like an inherited house where parent paid, little on it and then inherited that property and then sold it. Is the person who inherited the property or then selling the property, what is their liability? And does it depend how the property was transferred to them, if it was willed, how those capital gains come into
Yep.
play? Because I've seen a lot.
Depends on a million factors. It depends on will. It depends on how the property was held by the deceased. It depends on the buyer's situation tax wise. There's a ton of different items involved there. definitely a question for an estate attorney and a CPA. We'd need to see the whole picture because there's estate tax, obviously, that could be due, that could transfer. So unfortunately, not an easy question. But generally, as a very, very sort of mass generalization, there's probably going to be some liability there, depending on what was transferred, when, and how. Terrible answer, but
Okay,
it's
so
it's a very tough one.
that's okay. So then recommendation, if we do know it is a situation where we have an inherited property and we're speaking to a seller,
Yep.
is it recommended to get an estate attorney involved much sooner
Yes.
so that we have, okay,
100% a state attorney who's working with a good CPA, whether it's the customer's CPA or just someone they work with, really want to get the full picture so there's no surprise down the road. Because you know what happens when there's surprises down the road. The first thing your client does is say, Lauren, why didn't you tell me about this? Even though it has nothing to do with you.
Lauren, I'm assuming that other topic you feel like is just, it's going to be a longer one. We'll save it for tomorrow.
Yeah, in 2 minutes, I feel it's something else we can
Okay.
talk about another time.
Anybody
I will,
have?
since
Go
I
ahead.
have the mic, I will grab that. We are going into our follow-up boss training, so CMA training conversations as soon as we end here.
Right. This is one of my favorite trainings, guys. Like learning how to use your CRM, I think is the best skill that you can develop and that can change the amount of business that you do. Right. Your conversations, your ability to send a text message in a timely manner, to send value in a timely manner, easily and repeatedly, utilizing tasks, having those conversations, using automations, all of that stuff's really, really important, whether you're working a lead or your sphere. I think one of the biggest issues that we have running a leads-based team is the transition from, okay, I'm working leads to I'm growing a database that I'm going to get referrals from. And the way that you do that, right, our best agents that are coming off of the leads team and then going out into the wild and being a legitimate independent agent, they've figured out, how do I take all of those leads that I closed and get referrals from them? And the easiest way to do that is to work through a CRM and have a systematic approach. So I think if you asked some of the veteran agents how much money they've left on the table from not figuring out how to use their CRM, the numbers would shock you. Right. So I think there's a lot of regret from agents that have been in the business that didn't nail this. And we really want to get you guys hyper focused on building a database that you can communicate with regularly. So please join that call even if it's been a little while since you've been on there. Lauren's got a lot of new little tips and tricks. So awesome. Well, Scott, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Katie, thanks for getting him on.
Thanks for having
us. You
You
guys are great. We're lucky to have you guys as a preferred.
Same.
And
Thank you,
yeah,
guys.
maybe we'll have you come back, Scott, and talk about something else.
Anytime. Always
All right.
happy to come back. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care, guys. Have a great Thursday. We'll do it again tomorrow, and we'll close the week strong. Take care.
Have a good one.